All right, I think we're just about ready to make a start. So thank you all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining today's discussion entitled Looking Ahead, What's in Store for Junior Solicitors in 2026. It's a pleasure to see all of you here in attendance, and I'm grateful for everyone making the time on a Tuesday to come and discuss the topic. For those of you who don't know me, by way of introduction, I'm Harry, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Junior Solicitors Network at the Law Society and the chair of the National Junior Lawyers Division. And as the names imply, these groups advocate for the interests of junior lawyers and junior solicitors across England and Wales. And as I often do when I speak on the topic of juniors, I think it's worth briefly reflecting on what the term junior lawyer actually means. It might sound like a self-explanatory term that captures a narrow demographic of the profession, but in reality it's an extraordinarily broad constituency and group of people. It spans every region of England and Wales, private practice and in-house, legal aid and commercial practitioners, those who have qualified through the SQE, the LPC, eventually the apprenticeship route and beyond, and people with very different personal circumstances and responsibilities and experiences. It's also crucially a definition that's based on experience and not age, and we define a junior lawyer as those falling between 0 to 6 years post-qualification experience. And so accordingly, the challenges that the Junior Solicitors Network or the JSN come across in our work are quite varied, and they're often layered with professional, personal, cultural and economic factors to consider. I also thought I'd provide a bit of a brief word on what the JSN and the wider junior structures across the profession actually do. And at heart, our role is to ensure that junior voices are heard consistently and credibly in the places where decisions are shaped, both in and outside the confines of the Law Society. And in practice, that work falls into a few different strands. We have community events like these tonight, roundtables, webinars, and spaces where juniors can share their experiences candidly and learn from each other and experts, such as those that we're joined with tonight. We do evidence gathering to identify what's really happening on the ground through surveys, feedback channels, and structured engagement, so we're not just relying on anecdotes alone. We have advocacy and influence initiatives where we try and take those insights and proposals to respond to consultations and press for change with employers, regulators, and the wider profession where that's needed. And we offer practical direct support. We signpost resources and produce guidance that helps juniors navigate the day-to-day realities of practice with their career decisions, workplace challenges, and their own personal and professional development. So turning to 2026, our detailed programme for the year is in the final stages of being finalised. But as chair, I've proposed that the work of the JSN over the next 12 months will focus on 3 central pillars, and these are based on the work that the JSN encountered during 2025 and where we see some of those matters progressing in the next 12 months. And these issues and topics aren't new, but the way in which that they are presenting themselves as issues and the urgency behind them is often shifting and changing. The first of those pillars is AI and technology literacy. Of course, it would be remiss if this issue wasn't on our radar, and quite literally everyone is talking about it. Clients are asking what it means for risk and cost and speed and accountability. Firms and in-house teams are experimenting. And across the profession, I've certainly felt a full spectrum of reaction in my discussions with others, juniors or otherwise, as to what it will really mean for the future of practice. For some, it registers a genuine threat to traditional training and progression and practice. But to others, it's an opportunity to do better work or faster work and to spend more time on judgment than just basic processes. But what makes this quite hard is that the questions that junior solicitors have been asking me in the committee of what do I need to know and should I care and how will it affect me and how can I upskill sound quite simple and straightforward, but in reality, they rarely have simple answers. And that's not because the questions are wrong or misplaced or anything like that, but because, as one junior expressed to me at an event quite recently, they feel as though the ground underneath them keeps moving. Even if we froze AI's development today, the profession would probably still need quite a bit of time to work through the implications as to what good looks like in practice, what safe and ethical use could actually require to be adopted across the profession, how we supervise the outputs and so forth. But of course, we're not freezing anything, and the rate of investment in AI is accelerating, the tools are evolving quickly, and expectations both within practices and from clients externally are shifting quite rapidly and in real time. So our focus for 2026 is not to take a position that's for or against the technology per se, but to try and make sure that juniors are equipped to understand the technology at a practical and basic level, to ask the right questions, to use it responsibly, and to protect their professional judgment in a world where new and shiny might not automatically always mean better. The second pillar is well-being, and as I said to a room of junior lawyers and the Law Society president, Mark Evans, at an event this morning, I really mean that in the most holistic sense, covering mental well-being, the usual markers of burnout and stress, which have historically been discussed in the profession, but new avenues like physical well-being, financial well-being, and trying to develop an inclusive culture that allows people to do their best work. And many of today's junior lawyers, fitting that demographic that I mentioned earlier, entered the profession, or they began their studies during a period of unprecedented upheaval thanks to COVID. I was one of them. And there are still lasting effects today on issues such as the evolution of work-life boundaries and culture. And all of this is compounded by varying degrees of uncertainty that we all face in our everyday lives now, economic and political, that whilst affecting us all, can have its disproportionate effect on juniors that are just starting out in their careers. And finally, the third pillar is that of career and practice development. Career paths are diversified. The data shows that the traditional notion of progression to partnership or your in-house equivalent is simply not as attractive in the broadest sense to this cohort. And further, the routes to qualification are changing thanks to the SQE and apprenticeships. The in-house market share of the profession continues to grow. Portfolio careers, secondments, setting up your own businesses, alternative legal services are becoming increasingly visible. And I think for juniors, that's really encouraging and energizing, but it can be a bit disorientating if you're just starting out and you don't know who to turn to. And so the challenge is that we need to give juniors the tools that they need to develop a coherent professional identity and a skill set, whilst making sure that they've still got some optionality to be flexible in their careers and progress how they see fit, and often at times working with imperfect information in any sense. And all of this leads really neatly to today's panel. The purpose of this discussion was really to try and sort of horizon scan the next 12 months that I'll be overviewing the JSN as the chair, and to try and identify the opportunities, the challenges that are likely to shape the sector, and more specifically, how they will affect junior solicitors. We'll look back briefly at the year just gone in 2025, and then try to focus on those key themes that I've set out for this evening of tech and AI, career paths and development and well-being, before we open the floor to questions from you towards the end. Let's start by having a look back on the year just gone. I know a lot has happened throughout the course of 2025 to the profession. More broadly, to name but a few, the legal profession was the highlight of the government's renewed industrial strategy for professional and business services. The Civil Justice Council was outlining reforms for UK litigation funding. The SQE has entered its fourth year of being available to students. And the percentage of lawyers that's practicing in-house just continues to grow. So an open question to the panel to start. Louise, perhaps you can kick us off. Any highlights for you personally, professionally, over the last year in 2025?
I'll be greedy and I'll pick two. So professionally, I would say highlight perhaps more of a thank goodness I did it and it was all fine. I spoke at our European practice group meeting to a room of 400 lawyers. Wow. On a panel on AI, as the facilitator, not the expert, I hasten to add. But that was something I was really proud of doing without sort of stumbling too much or being so terrified I stopped speaking. And personally, we adopted a dog. So we rescued a dog, which was wonderful and very challenging. But that was my personal highlight.
Fantastic. Idin?
I don't know if I can top that. Professionally, so I think some of the work that I do with LittleLaw is by reaching out to law firms and partnering with them to help. The aim is to help junior lawyers have a better understanding of what the junior end of the legal career looks like. Over the last year, we've been able to partner with a bunch of law firms, which is good for a few reasons. It means that we can get more close to the actual legal work and then be able to talk about it in a much more specific and tangible way. So yeah, professionally, that was my highlight, and I think it's helped our content improve, it's helped our relationship with partners improve, it's helped also us to enable candidates to be more confident in their applications. So yeah, I think my highlight is the fact that law firms are taking this challenge of what does being a junior lawyer really look like seriously, and it's been a pleasure to work with the firms that we work with.
Dan?
Thank you. So there's a number of things to choose, but I think I'll focus on one in particular. We do a lot of work when we bring client and firm together to look at how, as a team, can we deliver better outcomes for business. And one of the things that we focus on is this need for the relationships that you're building to be very much a team sport, is what we call it. And that's because the team no longer, I think, is all about the client relationship partner. And the client wants to see much more of the talent that is within the firm and the team that's delivering the service. And I think that breadth of skill sets, so it not just being about the lawyer, not just being about the most senior lawyer, but being about the whole team, is something we're seeing so much more of. And much of that's being driven by the client because, of course, I don't know, just a quick poll, how many of you are in private practice? And, okay, so the majority in-house? Okay, so the majority are in private practice. Now, from an in-house perspective, which is the world I know so well, clients are wanting more and more to see the breadth of talent. And that, for me, is a really positive thing. And I think that gives such great opportunity for firms who are looking at how do we nurture the next generation of leaders in this organisation. And the other very positive thing I'm seeing in last year, which is building on what we're seeing elsewhere and what we'll talk about today, is every conference I go to, there is something on well-being, on culture, on people, and that is a complete shift from where we were 10 years ago. So loads of reasons to be positive. Personally, I didn't think about the personally, Louise, you've stumped me on that, but I've got 2 kids, 11 and 8. Oliver started secondary school this year. Oliver's autistic, and so to watch him go into a school that's got a specialist unit that can support him and his talents and potential has been a real eye-opener for me, and a joy to watch him thrive a bit more because he really struggled at primary school, right? Really struggled. So personally, that's been a big step. And also, I think on that front, just recognising I have an 8-year-old daughter as well that always plays second fiddle to an autistic elder child. So we've done a huge amount on bringing that together. So personally, brilliant year in that sense.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And certainly a topic that's been at every other conference that I've ever been to is AI. and one that I wanted to start with to get it out the way, for a better phrase. I think 2025 was quite an interesting year for AI and law. So to give a bit of a recap, the SRA authorised Garfield Law, a law firm that's actually right down the road from where I live, as the first, quote, purely AI-based law firm to help sort of provide that new point of access to those needing legal services. A lot of the major vendors like Harvey and Legora struck partnerships with law firms across the city and elsewhere, and some firms have really sort of tried to grab this opportunity by introducing some new innovation initiatives that allow lawyers to count AI experimentation and tooling towards some of their hours targets, and particularly at the junior end as well. So in my mind, that begs a few questions, and I guess the main one is, what's the case for AI adoption in law in 2026? An open question to the panel.
I mean, picking up on the in-house perspective, from my perspective in private practice, clients expect us to use AI tools, whether that is purely from an efficiency perspective or whether it is sort of the more advanced, reviewing the case, merits assessment perspective, or disclosure using AI rather than just CAL or TAR, so computer assisted learning and targeted review. I can't remember exactly what they are. But that they are absolutely requiring us to do that. In nearly every pitch I've been asked to contribute to, there's always been a section on, well, what is your innovation strategy? What AI tools are you using? If you're not using them, why not? So I think from our perspective, clients are demanding it, and therefore we must always consider what is appropriate to use on any given case and in any given matter. And all of the tools that we use are very much sandbox, so nothing is open sourced, everything remains confidential and privileged. So, and I think there are a huge amount of benefits to be gained from using the tools and the tech, but I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
I think on AI use or tech use more generally, when I was in practice, I remember I was training in during COVID times, so before AI blew up. And I remember the frustration I would feel between going to work and then we'd have the document management system, which is all kind of looks really old and it's very clunky, and then someone has to check out a document and then make some changes, and then I couldn't make my changes until they checked it in. And then I could go in and make my changes, but then I'd go home and I'd have Google Docs or whatever, and I could have multiple people in one document making changes. And that frustration that I felt between what I had access to at home to do something as simple as make changes, 2 people making changes in the live document at the same time, versus what I had at work, it was so disparate, and you could feel it so tangibly because you close your work laptop, open your actual laptop, and then the problem is solved. I can't imagine with AI how much more frustrating that would be if you're someone in the junior end who doesn't have access to these tools at work, but does at home. And I would think that if I were still in private practice now, and you are dealing with things that you think can be done a better way, or the tools exist to make it easier, but you don't have access to them, I think that would be a potential driver for talent. If you are looking to move to a firm, it might be a question that is something that you raise at that stage to ask, how do you use tech, and what do you have available to me, because you want the tools to do the job as best as you can.
Dan, obviously you've got a background in in-house work, and obviously you work a lot with process and change and systems management at the moment. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
I think it's inevitable it's going to play an increasingly large part. Clients, as you say, are driving it, Louise. So just put yourself in their shoes for a minute and think, why is it they're driving it so hard? Well, the in-house legal teams are under huge pressure. People may have heard about more for less, that they are under this challenge of, you for the first time, in-house legal teams are having to now be much more efficient in what you do, are under huge cost pressures. Now that's inevitably going to pass on to the law firms, because if the in-house team is feeling that, then their supply chain is going to feel it even more. So that will get passed on, which means there's got to be smarter ways of doing things. AI at the moment, the way it's being used is very much in an efficiency way, and I think it's a brilliant tool. I think it's brilliant for someone like me. I turn 50 this year, 2nd of April, if you're thinking of any gifts. But it's being used by everyone in every generation. I think that's incredible, just the kind of wealth of stuff that you can use it for that really improves your day-to-day efficiency. And in-house, the level of encouragement to use it's there, and it will become really powerful. But the impact, I think, is going to be significant as well. As more in-house teams look for efficiency, they use and are in fact bringing in Harvey and Lugora now. Some of the bigger, and everyone saw HSBC have just announced today that they have partnered with Harvey. So as a big in-house team doing that, everyone will start to follow suit, subject to having the money. So it's inevitable that there's going to be more work in-house, which means then for private practice, that's going to require a different focus on how we do what we do. Being efficient's great, but if you're on a model that requires you to be inefficient to make money on the 6-minute billing units, we've got to think differently about how we do it. And I think that's a brilliant opportunity. And you mentioned threat versus opportunity. And it's natural that people would be a bit nervous about it if you've studied law and come into this profession and technical has been king in every respect. But what an opportunity to start moving away from doing some of the work that, frankly, I'm not convinced that super talented people that come into our industry should be doing. And we take the brightest and the best talent with incredible potential, and we get them doing menial tasks for several years. That's absurd. This series of tools will take that away if used properly and allow us to bring this talent up and unleash the potential that is within the junior audience today and beyond. So I'm super excited from a buyer perspective, super excited from a junior lawyer perspective. The people I think that maybe see it as a threat now are the partners that are thinking, wow, how do we now continue to operate on the same basis that's made us so successful when the world is moving very much at a fast pace?
It reminds me of a quote. Someone came up to me at an event, they were a junior, and they said they felt unburdened by experience with regards to AI. They were in effect a blank canvas, and that they're early on in their practice, and so they don't have those institutionalized behaviors of how to deal with a matter in a certain way, and there's arguably more elasticity there for them to approach things differently and to consider new ways of working. So it's interesting how that resonates. I guess the key question for the juniors in this room then is, okay, so we think there's an opportunity and there's obviously rational reason to adopt these tools. How do you do that while still maintaining standards of knowledge, expertise? Law schools and universities are still trying to keep pace with these things. How can you make sure that you're still developing the core competencies you need in order to keep contributing in a way that's meaningful for your business or for a firm if you're in private practice?
I feel very strongly about this. As the knowledge lawyer for the team, we have access to several tools, and some of those are AI-assisted tools for research products, so databases like Thomson Reuters or Lexis, and I very much encourage the juniors and the trainees to use those. However, if they use those and then do not check by reference to primary sources that the answer they have been given is correct, that is my biggest fear. Because as a junior, if you've not looked at that question before, or perhaps you didn't study that particular aspect of law in any of your education, then you may not realise you've been led down the garden path, or you followed a red herring when you've been doing some of your research. If you go back to the sources and you check the legislation, or you read the case, or whatever the reference may be, you will then be able to use your own critical thinking and your legal reasoning skills to understand whether the answer that AI has pointed you to is correct or not. If you do not do that, that is the biggest danger I foresee with these tools. But you are able to do that because all of the products I've just mentioned say, oh, here's my source, here's my source. So then you can literally just click a link and it'll take you to the case and you read the case, not just the AI summary of the case, please. And so that is, I think, the most important aspect.
Absolutely.
I think as well, there's a big distinction to be made between having the tool in a firm and having people actually use that tool. As part of my training contract, I was able to do 6 months in the innovation team for my firm at CMS, and the firm had everything. They had every tool that existed at that time that a firm might need. But as part of the role I had to look at usage and report on what actually gets used, and you'd see that there are basically hotbeds of usage for different tools. That might be in particular offices. I remember like our Vienna office was using all the tools all the time, or like certain practice areas would use all the tools all the time, and then some areas wouldn't. And in its nature, it can't be that there's something happening in Vienna that isn't happening in London that is making us unable to use this, other than potentially culture. And I remember when we were training as well, we were exposed to a bunch of tools, given training on the tools, and then when you go into the practice teams, you have an interest or you have a excitement for the tools, you have an awareness, and then maybe you pose it, and that's, I remember posing a tool at times which the partner at the time wasn't familiar with, and they were hesitant to use it, and then I kind of backed down and thought, okay, if they don't want me to use it, then I probably shouldn't use it, and then that kind of cycle perpetuates. So having the tool in and of itself at the firm, and it makes a nice headline, but you don't get the benefit until it's used, and the behaviors and cultures that drive usage is another challenge altogether.
I think that, look, it's a great point. The cultural piece is really important, because if you have leaders in your firm who are encouraging it, who are giving you the space to try the different tools out there, because let's face it, we're all learning, right? I'm sure people play with it. How many people use ChatGPT or equivalent every day in their lives, some point, home lives or something? So most people will now, at some point, treat it as their assistant, their friend, their partner. I don't know, people go a bit wild with it these days. that it's there, and I think in work, I think you made this point earlier, to have it at home, not at work, was going to feel really awkward. You think, I could do that so much more efficiently. So it's inevitable that's going to be the case, but you do want the leadership to get behind it, to make sure it's embedded. The thing that you pick up on in different parts of the teams, and Louise, you're closer to this than I am now, being in a big law firm, different teams have their own cultures within a law firm, not just geographically, but even in this building probably. And the take-up will be different in different teams depending on how much you're encouraged to give things a go. Do you have a leader that's prepared to and willing to allow you just to spend some time and learn and grow and fail and go again and learn? Or are you in a team that's very much about, no, everything has to be spot on? Because one of the biggest concerns I've had about this industry for so long is this desire for everything has to be perfect. And I think that leads to a real fear culture and an environment where people don't give their best. So if we can have this environment where we have this continuous learning kind of mentality, that people are given a bit of rope to be able to play with and to give these tools a go. I'm hearing, whether this is true or not, but in some firms there are people at all levels who are able to have a go at something, can see something, learn it, come up with an idea, and that then finds its way into practice. I think Linklaters had something advertising recently saying one of the more junior lawyers was playing with a tool over the weekend, came up with something that's been rolled out across the firm, right? So it gives people that freedom and that empowerment, but that comes from the culture of your organisation or your team that allows you to do that. And if it's there, it's just such a powerful tool.
No, amazing. And one of the last questions I want to ask on this topic before we move on, it comes up a lot when I talk about AI at conferences like these, is from that camp of concern and fear, and it's about the pipeline of work and development, and is the way that in which juniors have learnt on the job in private practice, or even perhaps even prior to them in university, going to be the same blueprint and method of learning and developing those skills going forwards if there is a change in the nature and the type of work that is coming in because of a change in instructions on the in-house side, and more of that work being handled internally. I'd be curious if you think that will bear itself out, or if you think there will still be opportunities in some capacity to grind your teeth on the grunt work, so to speak.
I mean, I think change is inevitable. I think the type of work that juniors will do will just look different. And for those of you who have not had this pleasure of sitting in a room for hours clicking relevant, not relevant on documents, can you tell I'm a litigator? I'm very envious that you will not have to do that. However, that's a really good example from my area of expertise, because the tools in disclosure and using AI specifically are fantastic. They don't need to sleep. They can work 24/7. They can do it much cheaper, and they can do it really effectively. And we literally have the data to show that they are doing it as well, if not better, than a room full of trainees or paralegals. And that means that you get freed up to do much more interesting work. So that does mean things will change. It does mean that workflows will need to change. It means your experience will change. I don't see that as a bad thing, but lawyers are hesitant and we don't particularly like change. And I don't know what all of those answers will look like, but I do think that it is an area of opportunity. But that provides a lot of uncertainty for those of you who are at the beginning of your career, because I can't tell you what type of work you will be doing instead. So I don't know how helpful that was as an answer, but that's my thoughts.
It's true though. I think the work you're going to do, I mean, you talked about the yes, no. I remember paginating. Has anyone ever heard of paginating as a phrase? I don't think it exists now, does it? Constantly looking at bundles. I was a litigator and going through and paginating every page, and I was terrible at it. You make a mistake because the thing gets stuck and you have to start all over.
Yeah.
These kind of jobs are just eradicated now, which makes it so much more interesting. But again, I'm going to come right back to the point we made last time. If you've got that environment where people say, look, you're going to be more efficient, you're going to do more interesting stuff, you've got to now step up and play your part. You can't be spoon-fed as a junior, as I was probably too much. I think we were wrapped in cotton wool too much as a junior. I'm not saying it was easy, it wasn't, but we were on such a clear, like you're doing a linear kind of approach. Now I think that whole linear approach has disappeared. The freedom that I hope firms will give will allow people to really achieve their potential. So it does lead to much more of a challenge, which for me has been there since O-Shape started, which was all about, do we set ourselves up from law school onwards to provide people with the necessary skills to thrive in a world that is changing? I think the LPC, when I did it 25 years ago, was out of date then. SQE comes in, I think, great, we've got something now that's going to really shift the dial, and it hasn't, right? It's arguably more technical, not perhaps as practical for people to then apply day to day. So we've left ourselves in this real difficult situation now. We've got the entrance exams into the profession bear no resemblance on what it's like to be in the profession. And I think that's something that's got to change. And I think the reason it hasn't changed so far is largely because big law, that frankly pays the bills of the law schools, isn't driving that change through, because we want to just keep doing the same thing we have been, because it's been such a successful model. I just think that's going to change.
That's a good segue into the topic of sort of agency of junior solicitors and shaping a career and trying to seize those opportunities. And you mentioned the SQE. I think that's probably been the most impactful, for want of a better word, change that's happened, certainly in that sort of formulaic sense of going to university and getting your qualifications and then getting your foot on the ladder and then being in the sort of the belly of the beast of practice. Perhaps I can come to you on that. I'd be curious you've worked a lot with students who are yet to sort of put their foot on the ladder in that sense. What's your sense been of how these changes to qualification routes and access to these opportunities is actually impacting things on the ground?
Yeah, I did a post a few months back now, inviting people to tell me about their thoughts and experience on the SQE, and the challenges that came up to me were very frustrating to hear, because I think students have lost a lot of trust in what it was set out to do. It was meant to be the great equalizer. It was meant to be something that you could do much cheaper than the old way of LPC. That hasn't really panned out. Lots of trust. Also, of course, there's a whole mark scandals and all this sort of thing, the mistakes with grades, and obviously that you lose trust fast that way. But even just the values that it was meant to represent, the main one of which being accessibility, from the experience of people who've done it, it hasn't managed that. And the challenges that people have had are like, there's so many ones that to me are like simple ones to fix. People telling me about logistical issues, exams not starting on time, laptops being old so they can't finish things do things as efficiently in the exam centres. So I think it's a lack of trust generally, which, as you say, Dan, with the if there isn't a push from firms perhaps for improvement or change in this, we probably won't see a change. But from students going through the process, that's the main thing that I've seen. A loss of trust for a bunch of reasons.
I mean, to build on it, we partner with BPP, and what we see in the work that we do with them is very much about, look, firms want to get people through the exams, right? Get through the exams and then we can start for real. And I don't think we're looking at the opportunity that law school can give, which is really start to, as we talked just beforehand, you were at York, where they have this problem-based learning approach at undergrad level, which is an unbelievably sensible, pragmatic way of getting you ready for practice, right? And I don't know if anyone knows about problem-based learning. I'm sure I'll catch you up afterwards. You can tell me all about it.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah.
And so, and I'll leave you just to share a bit more about that. But before I do, what that should give you when you come into our profession is really a sense of, look, I'm not going to be the expert on day one. I should never be expected to be the expert on day one. But I kind of got a sense of what this industry is all about, what my role is within this industry, and how I can genuinely make a difference in what I'm doing every day. Because I think most people come into this industry in order to deliver great outcomes for their clients, whoever their clients are. They feel like they've got a real value and a role to play. I think that's just disappeared. I think we've now brought people in simply through a machine, a sausage machine, to get into firms, to go through firms and follow their career path. And we've lost a little bit of the sense of the why, I think.
Just to give context, so the problem-based learning approach is the same approach that medics are used to understand and learn medicine. It's applied in a legal context. So at York, where I studied, 12 other students would sit in a room with you. You'd create a fictional law firm. You'd receive fictional emails from fictional clients in order to learn how to solve and digest a problem. You're still supplemented with typical kind of academic head-in textbook style learning and lectures, but the emphasis was on that sort of simulated problem-based learning approach. And to me, it was a great way to contextualize what you were trying to understand. And as I was saying to Dan before we started, I think that could be a blueprint for what the future of development could look like at that very early stage level. It also leads me nicely onto a question I had about the sort of typical pivot points, pivotal moments in that timeline of getting up to 6 years PQE. I think even before the SQ was introduced, and whether or not you studied through a traditional learning format or elsewhere, there's definitely a sense that there are big moments that you have to consider quite early on in your career with regards to obviously getting either a training contract or some sort of foot in the door to get experience, to get requisite experience in order to then qualify, and even then once you're qualified within a team to really sort of begin to develop your niche and understanding of where your practice will sit. I'd just be curious to hear the panel's thoughts on whether those pivot points will remain the same, whether we think that they may change as a result of all of the other factors that we've been discussing, and how can juniors kind of really try and understand and grapple with that understanding where those pivot points are in their career now, and understanding the implications of them on their career going forwards.
I think the first thing I'd say is it's really helpful to be flexible about what you think the next 5, 10, 15 years is going to look like. If you think right now, I'm going to be a partner and I'm going to be a partner at X firm or X type of firm, that's great. And if that's your motivation and that's your ambition, that's wonderful. But allow yourself to know that that may change. So I certainly wanted to be a partner. I then realised I didn't. But that was, 4 or 5 years in. And actually then I stayed at the same firm, and now I'm a knowledge lawyer, much happier. But I think it's really important to be flexible, because you go through your journey and you go through, your law school and your, undergrad and then LPC for me, and then your training contract, and you're meant to know from day one what you want to do. I was quite late to the party because I did employment first, then corporate insolvency, then private wealth management, then litigation, and realised in my fourth seat, oh, it was the contentious aspects of all the other seats that I actually liked the most. Oh, Christ, I want to qualify into my fourth seat, which is more difficult, apparently. And luckily I was able to, and that's wonderful, and there was a job for me. But I think being flexible and knowing that your experience will change you, and you might think you want to be a corporate lawyer. Great, go and get some experience or do one of your seats there. And if you don't like it, that's fine. There will be another area that you find more interesting. So I think flexibility is really key. Obviously, if you've got a long-term goal, great, but allow that shift to be there. As for sort of actual pivotal moments, I'm not sure that I can share any particular wisdom other than to say that I don't think there's one set timeline that works for any one lawyer or any one firm. And if someone tells you different, I think they're wrong.
I think the average age of a qualifying lawyer was 28 when I was at uni. It's now trending upwards of 30, and there was definitely a pressure when I was at uni to always compare yourself to where others were left and right of you, and I think that's hopefully going to be starting to change as these
don't do that.
awareness
Don't
of all
compare
these
yourself to
recruits
someone
and
else.
others.
You don't know half of their story, and it's exhausting and pointless.
Indeed.
I think the options for lawyers to delve into other things is also more open than it's ever been. I met two of my friends earlier today who are both lawyers, but now both doing very different things. One works in DEI, one works as a full-time in media, and what they experience in law has helped them do what they're doing now. My own experience as well, when I qualified, I was 2 PQE before I left to do my own thing. I had a very candid conversation with one of the partners there saying, oh, what if everything goes wrong? Like, can I come back? And he was like, yeah. He said, yeah. He said, I'll just ask you, or if you do an interview, and if I was interviewing someone with your profile, I'd say, oh, what did you learn when you were doing it? And if you had a good answer for that, it wouldn't necessarily be a challenge. Also, in the last week, I've seen articles about some of the legal tech providers, I think it was Harvey in particular, offering mad salaries and equity for people to leave law firms. So there are other options, and there are more. I think the well-trodden path or the traditional path of associate, mid, senior, then try and become a partner is not necessarily the only way, which I think, as you said, Louise, is just increases people's ability to be flexible.
It's borne out in the data as well. I'd seen Law Care have released their sort of Life in the Law report recently, and I think the evidence was that well over a third, it might even be closer to half of lawyers that were surveyed were considering leaving their role within the next 5 years, some on an even shorter timescale than that, and it was disproportionately prevalent at the junior end. And I think the sentiment across a lot of this analysis is that the carrot of partnership isn't as sweet as it was to many people anymore, and there's more awareness now of these alternative career paths and an opportunity, as Idin was saying, on juniors to take responsibility in that sense and do something themselves if they wanted to. So no, thank you for that. Before I move on to wellbeing, Dan, anything you wanted to add on taking ownership of a career in that sense?
Two things, I think. One is in-house, you don't have the same, you're 2 years PQE, 3 years PQE. I've always found that bizarre that you are technically promoted every year just by being. And it's weird, isn't it? I'm 3 years PQE, I'm 4. And I get it, right? It's a sign of this kind of level of competition that seems to exist throughout the firm, that I'm 2 years, I'm 3 years, therefore I'm more senior than you, therefore that gives me some sort of hierarchy. I mean, that just shouldn't be the case. This is not really, it's not really a healthy environment to be in. What I'm much more interested in people who want to go out and learn different things. Now, O-Shaped is all about the well-rounded skills. So it's about how do we increase the breadth of our knowledge so that you do have this learning. Whatever it is you do, it's a learning opportunity. People say you don't fail, you just learn. And I went on secondment for a year outside of the legal team, and I worked in a commercial role, and it was an eye-opener. I learnt loads, mostly about how difficult it is to work with lawyers. But it's something that you can only get if you're willing to give something different a go. And it's such a linear path. Fortunately, it's changed to an extent from when it was. It was either your partnership or you're out, right? So you're going down that path, you're out. Now you're right, there are so many different opportunities, even within law, to do different roles. The other thing I would say is just always bear in mind, why you want to do something. What is it you're doing it for? Are you doing it because you just want to go up this greasy pole? Great, if that's what you really want to do. Or are you doing it just because you feel others are, so you have to? And I think it's got to be about what you really want to do. Again, if you're going into a job that's allied to the technical lawyering, think about why. What is it that that role is doing to support the clients? Because the clients' needs are changing. They aren't all about just, we need the smartest, biggest brain in the world to tell us the law. They are all about, how do you help us solve problems? And that requires a lot more than, in addition to, than just the lawyer in the room.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. And then finally, turning to the kind of third pillar I wanted to discuss of wellbeing and workplace culture. As I said at the outset, this is definitely a big priority for our committee, and indeed the Law Society. I had a discussion with Mark Evans this morning on the issue, and had some candid discussions with individual solicitors from some of the biggest city firms about the pressures that they face. And as I said at the outset, the typical markers of burnout and stress and workload demands, etc., were always prevalent as they have been previously. But the thing that really grabbed my attention was people were discussing well-being in a much more holistic and through other dimensions beyond just purely mental well-being. There was discussions about what firms can do to support individuals' physical well-being, to discuss the side of things that don't get discussed a lot, like financial well-being and monetary expenditure, and more generally, how will this new cohort of junior lawyers, not Gen Z, because there is a distinction coming through the profession, are going to impact the future of sort of workplace culture. I guess as an open question to the panel to start, your own experiences in navigating the modern workplace, the stresses of it, and you've all got such different backgrounds and experiences. I'd be curious to hear what your own experiences have been and practical tips that you can give to juniors to help them kind of navigate that element of their career going forwards.
Sure. So I'll share a story with you all. Well, one of the partners I worked with a lot, who actually is now our managing partner, I said to him, Ed, how do you not get stressed? Like, what's your secret sauce? And he was like, no matter what I do, no one's going to die. Which I think is a really useful thing to share and a really useful thing to remember. It's something I didn't manage to remember when I was junior, and I did suffer from burnout. And at the time I was thinking, that's it, I failed, I'm out. I can't handle it. I'm too stressed. I've got to be signed off for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I can't even remember now how long it was, and that's sort of my point. It's completely irrelevant. Obviously, it wasn't pleasant to go through, but everyone has their own different resilience levels, and they will change over time. Some days you will feel you can take on anything. Other days, someone comments on the colour of your shoes and you cry, or whatever it may be. But actually, if you recognise signs of stress or anxiety or burnout in yourself, the only thing I would say is please do something about it, because I can tell you from bitter experience, ignoring it does not work. It just means that you will cry on the chief operating officer of your company in a seminar room. Yes, that happened, and she sent me home. However, the reason I wanted to share that with you is, I think it's really important to talk about it, because I think mental health still carries a bit of a stigma. But actually, the main reason I want to share it is it did not inhibit my career at Baker's one bit. I trained here, I was a junior associate here, I was a mid-level when it happened. I got to senior associate on exactly the same lockstep, year progress as my contemporaries. And then I was able to move internally into another role, and I feel very well respected and valued by my peers. So my terror at that moment of, oh my God, that's it, I failed, it's over, was wrong. And so if that can help anyone or any of your friends or peers ever, then yeah, I hope it does. The profession is high pressured, and it can be very stressful. And we had a talk recently from our healthcare provider sort of explaining macro and micro breaks to have balance, your macro being your annual leave. So, take your annual leave. It's, something that is really, really important to help you recharge. But your micro breaks might be, box breathing, where you hold your breath, inhale, hold your breath and exhale, because that really does regulate your nervous system. That's not sort of, something a yoga teacher might tell you, although they may. It is actually physiologically going to improve you and improve your nervous system and reduce some of that cortisol flying around your body. So do what you can, take a break, take a walk, make a cup of tea, whatever it may be. If you can find elements of balance in your day, that will help sustain you. But if you can't for whatever reason, then seek support and guidance. And if you are at a decent firm, it will not impact your career progression.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I can understand, but done right, it's a win-win for everyone. I mean, Dan, calling back to your sort of GC days, I've seen countless articles, comments, reports, surveys, whatever you want to call it, from people on the client side saying, we don't want our lawyers, unbelievably stressed and not performing at their best and working through the night at 3 a.m. when they don't need to be, because at the end of the day, they want the person that they're getting their services from to be at their peak and able to respond to you in kind. Be curious to hear your perspective on that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on. This is possibly the topic that I personally care most deeply about. I mean, I think your well-being is a absolute non-negotiable. There should be zero tolerance for anything other than that. The difficulty is we're in an industry where it's become an accepted part of what we do every day. You mentioned, I'll come on to the GCs in a minute, but you mentioned the Life in the Law survey. Well, I just had a quick look at it before it came up because I thought it was, and I put it through ChatGPT, you'd be glad to know, and it gave me these it's incredible, right? So it talks about 60% of respondents have poor mental health, right, in our industry, and that's well above the average in the UK. And the average, again, for burnout, well above. And one's got to look at why, right? And there are obviously individual circumstances. Everyone has their own pressure stress outside of work, right? So it's not all work-based. And I think one has to recognise, having led teams and seen people struggling, I like to think I was a good leader that cared, but there's lots of things that are outside your control, outside their control, that have an impact. It's not just work. But a good supportive environment with great leadership should recognise that and should be able to get the best out of people and recognise when they need to be off with stress or burnout and give them the time and space. Clients have just as much of a responsibility not to demand unreasonable deadlines from their firms as firms have not to demand unreasonable behaviour from their people. And I do think that this crosses the them and us line of private practice in-house that unfortunately does exist. It's an industry-wide problem that does need to be addressed. Without doubt, it's unsatisfactory that people should, because of work, if it is solely work-related, suffer. It's not good, as you say, for the business. It's not good for the individual. It's not good for the reputation of the firm either. So something has to be done at a much more industry-wide level. The kind of data we talk about and see is worrying. I think perhaps more worrying is that I'm not seeing enough leadership in this space. So we're nearly 2 years on now from the death of Vanessa Ford that made lots of headlines, if anyone remembers, from Pinson's, a very high-profile corporate lawyer. Now, again, I don't like to focus on individual cases because there's lots going on around an individual person's circumstances. But it was an opportunity, I think, for our industry to show more leadership, to step up and say, we're not accepting this anymore. That, frankly, it needs to be right at the top of our agendas. And I said at the outset, it's great that it's at conferences. It's great people are talking about it. We now need to see at an industry level much more of a focus and action on it. I think the SRA are spending time consulting on it this year, so we might well see a little bit more leadership. I'm a little bit concerned by when we hear, well, we're having pizzas on a Friday, so we'll all be great. That's not the answer. This is much more systemic and cultural. And I think it comes from a lack of genuine leadership within firms who are recognising that you're right, someone's not about to die. As someone joked with me once, it's always black humour in this kind of environment, but we're saving PDFs, not lives. I thought that's kind of fair and unfair in one sense. But there is that kind of perspective, and perhaps it's because I'm now 50, I can see that not quite 50, I can see that perspective now, having had a son that was very ill when he was born and recognising what's important, what's not. And my overall message from this kind of soapbox is, if you are in that situation where you feel like it is impacting your health, you have to take some action. In my day, it was seen as almost, say in my day like I'm hundreds of years old, but it was, and I suffered from really poor mental health, but absolutely did I get up and get on with it the next day? 100%. I was never going to admit or accept that I was struggling because of work. Now, I think people are much more aware, and I think and hope that many of the partners and leaders in our firms would understand that conversation. But I still think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Idin, you're nodding along.
Yeah, I think, as you say, Dan, it's the change from the leadership level is so important, because you said that this is a kind of behaviour that's accepted and commonplace in this industry. I think I'd go further and say it's historically been rewarded.
It has, yeah.
I've had instances where I've been pushing myself and pushing myself and pushing myself, and like you, Louise, I've also ended up crying in the cafeteria, and the feedback I get is, oh, you're going above and beyond, you're a safe pair of hands, all this sort of good stuff that you go, okay, I guess I should keep doing this.
Yeah.
So it's not just a case of, if you hear that as a junior, you're going to just carry on doing that, because it's such a competitive environment, and I went through 4 or 5 years of application to get that job in the first place. So if someone's telling me I'm doing it well, best believe that I'm going to carry on doing whatever I'm doing. So it was the shift from above, and the leadership is the only thing that would have made me take a step back. And in terms of how to deal with it, similar to you, Louise, I had a friend who, a supervisor actually, he's a senior associate when I was a trainee, and he was always really calm. And I'd ask him, how do you stay calm? And he said, similar to your story, he used to be a scuba diving instructor, and he was like, that was actually life and death. Like, if I made a mistake there, someone would die. Here, not the same stakes. So having that sense of perspective, I never managed to get there. I mean, it was nice to hear. I never managed to just kind of instill that in myself. But for me, it was having peers to speak to. There were, when I first started, some groups of my peers who, like you were suggesting, Dan, were also kind of quite guarded and wouldn't be vulnerable with one another, and kind of, you later find out, everyone was kind of putting on a bit of a front at first. But when you do speak to some of your friends, some of your closer friends, and you're more vulnerable, more often than not, they also share more openly, and that, just the sharing with even your peers, was a massive help for me to know that it's not just me that's feeling this way. There's more of us, and you can help and kind of laugh about it and help each other deal with it.
No, thank you.
I just had one very quick
course.
thing on this, because it is such an important thing, and I'm conscious of time. But I'm very lucky. I talk to lots of people who have their own experiences of this and share, and everyone is different, right? You know, some people love doing the long hours, they get a buzz from it, and I've got friends who have done it for years and are partners at firms and they love it, right? So we've got to accept that some people actually thrive on the kind of pressure, which is fine. It's a very individual thing. Others are doing it, and perhaps only after a period of time recognizing it wasn't them. And the example that very recently gave you, someone was saying to me, mid-level, I've realized that I was in the wrong place because I've missed my mother's 70th birthday, and I missed one of my best friend's wedding because of work. And that's when you do it at the time, you're in that environment, you feel like you're part of something super exciting. I'm on this deal, I'm on this piece of litigation, it's one of the top 10 bits of litigation in the lawyer this year, therefore it's right that I should be here on a Saturday night while everyone's celebrating my mother's 70th. I don't think that is right, whoever you are, unless you've got a beef with your mother, then I don't think...
No, even then you should go.
But sometimes you have to look back and reflect and say, is that what I really want to do? Because you're in the bubble, it's very hard. And that's why being able to get that perspective and bigger picture is really valuable. If it is you, good luck to you, right? If you are happy to do that, good luck to you. And I'm 100% behind you. But if it's not you, you've got to step out to have a bit of a reflection to say, is that what I really want? And that's where we start to see people further down the line going, I wish I'd done it differently. And I don't want you to ever be in that situation where you say, I wish I hadn't done it that way.
Yeah, that's the danger of comparison, right? Because several of my friends now at this firm are partners, and I sort of think, oh, well, have I maybe not done as well? I thought that for about half a millisecond, because I'm very happy in my role. And actually, they are the type of people who do thrive on pressure, because actually stress ultimately is not always a bad thing, right? It motivates you, it gives you that energy. It can be too much a bad thing, of course, if it gives you too much cortisol, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, some people do really thrive on that. And if they do and you don't, it's fine. You will find your own path. Don't compare yourself to someone, even if they're the same classmate as you or exactly the same age as you or exactly similar circumstances. Like, you've got to find your own path and what makes you happy.
I think that's the thread that's coming through this, right? It's finding a culture in a workplace that resonates with what you personally value. And I'll share a really interesting anecdote from the breakfast this morning. We were all going around and asking, what are firms doing right, what they're doing wrong with regards to well-being, and a lot of these conversations coming up about workload and stress and whatnot. And one person shared an example that was universally loved by everyone in the room, which was that every time someone does a small win for someone else, it doesn't have to be this huge matter, it doesn't have to be this huge task. They wrote it down on a post-it note with that person's name and put it in a jar. And at the end of the week, the leader of that team would stand up and unravel the jar and read out all of those moments of praise to the team so that everyone could hear it. And I thought that culture of positive reinforcement, as much as the negatives of, well, didn't quite get this right, you didn't quite get that, well, is just as important to balance things out. And it was quite surprising to see how many people just resonated with that. I'm conscious of time, so if anyone's got any questions from the floor that they'd like to raise, please start thinking of them now, and I'll come to you in a second. Before I do that, I wanted to ask a final question that actually I think, Dan, you might have posed in our speaker call as a bit of a concluding remark, which is, bearing all of this in mind, what's happened in 2025, what's going to happen over the next 12 months, what is the must-do for juniors in this room in order to stay ahead of the curve of all these issues and to prepare for the year ahead?
I shouldn't have raised it, should I? Now I've got to think about it. But my feeling is, and it has always been since O-Shape really started to take off, was that regardless of AI, and it's going to play its part, it's another tool. We've seen lots of tools come through. This might be the most amazing of all tools. This is still a people business. This is still an industry that's driven by relationships. It's still people buying from people, and ultimately how you interact at work, how you interact with your colleagues, your seniors, your juniors, your clients, that's everything. And when you reflect back, when people leave and you see a post on LinkedIn, they always say the thing they're going to miss most is the people, generally. I have not many say, I'm really going to miss that matter that we worked on for 3 years. So the people are everything, right? They always have been. They, in my lifetime left, they probably will be. And I had also the pleasure of talking to Richard Susskind recently, who is kind of the authority, isn't he, on AI in the law. And his kind of take on, when I said to him, look, he was asking, in this kind of world where AI is so dominant, how is O-Shape, which is about people, about relationships, about mindset, attributes, skill sets, how are you finding, people's interest in that? I said, look, what I've just said to you now is at the moment, people still buy from people. They value the trust in relationships. And he said to me, they do for now, but that will change. And I thought, imagine a world where people no longer have to build relationships to have trust to make things happen. And his view of the world is we're massively overhyping AI in the short term, but massively underhyping it in the long term. So I hope I'm not around to worry about when people don't buy from people and relationships aren't all about trust and everything else. But for now, that's where I would be spending time learning, growing, improving, because those interpersonal skills will stand you in good stead wherever you are, whatever you choose to do.
Thanks. Martin?
I think thinking back to my early years in the industry, I think the main thing for me that helped me excel, which would be much easier now than back then, was understanding context when you're doing any piece of work. And the reason I think it'll be easier now is, again, because of AI. I find myself so many times when I'm reading something or talking to someone about something technical, particularly in law, I'll go to ChatGPT and explain this to me like I'm 5, and then I'll have a much better understanding of what everything is. And the number of times that, as a junior, you'll be brought onto a deal at the last minute, or brought on but not really be sitting in on all the calls or whatever. So you're lacking the context, and from the siloed pieces of work that you're doing, sometimes it's hard to figure everything out. And if everyone else is super busy, you kind of hesitate to be like, hey, can you explain everything to me about what is this, and what's a private equity stack, and what's a midco and a bidco and whatever. So I think understanding the context of the even small pieces of work you might be able to do, especially in a private practice setting, is what I think will set you up for success. And with AI, I think that's easier to do than ever.
Just picking up on something Dan said about having those interpersonal skills, I have no idea who decided to coin the term soft skills, because they're not easy, right? So that they are quite difficult to do. And I think my piece of advice would be to, in your daily lives, find yourself a mentor, whether that it will maybe a few mentors, whether that is a peer, someone slightly more senior than you, someone much more senior than you. Learn from their experience and develop your soft skills through that process. And obviously you guys are all doing wonderfully because you are here, and there will be networking shortly. No one's allowed to run away. And being able to put yourself in that position, because things like networking is daunting and it is scary. So I think improving those skills and giving yourself an opportunity to have those conversations with people you haven't met before is fantastic. So yeah, get yourself a mentor or a couple of mentors. Even if it's for a short period of time, you sort of say, I'd really love to benefit from your experience. Maybe it's someone you work with. Can we go for a coffee? Or can I just ask you a few questions about such and such a topic? And most people will be willing to give you their time. So I'd really encourage you to do that and to work on your soft skills.
No, thank you all for sharing that. I'll just take the opportunity to say that. I feel like we've just given you information overload this evening. You're kind of processing it. Oh my God, so many things to think about. There is a lot that the committee and the Law Society will be doing throughout the course of the year. And if there's something that we've spoken about that resonates with you particularly, and you want to find an avenue or a way to explore that further, or to develop a skill further, or to volunteer and you don't know how, please come find me. There will be chances for you to meet people who are experts in that field, to connect with like-minded individuals, to learn even more. And as I hope we've been saying this evening, to take that with you into your careers, sort of wherever it ends up going. So thank you all for your time and for speaking. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to pose to the panel?
Please don't. Please don't. I totally hear you. But I think, there is an ethical risk, definitely, if that happens, because that would be breach of confidentiality and potentially loss of privilege, and that's one of the things that keeps me up at night. Privilege is my topic. So there is definitely a risk there, but I do think that those firms will be in the minority because, as I said before, clients are insisting that we use those tools, even if it doesn't mean that everyone has to have the most expensive tool or have access to Harvey or Legora, any of these other huge tools. It might be some other productivity tool, but I do think that firms who say they're not going to use it will not be in existence for too much longer, I don't think. But yeah, definitely don't use AI at home.
Just to add that, I don't think there's any way that they can reasonably prevent it either. I'm actually speaking at the Risk and Compliance Conference with the Law Society in March. We've had some discussions about it already, and we pointed to examples of firms that have come out with blanket no AI usage policies, and they are the type of firms that are big enough that could establish some sort of tool that's safe to use within the firm if need be. And the conversation is always the same. A policy that says don't do this is only as effective as you being able to actually audit it and enforce it. And in most circumstances, the firms can't. Yeah. So AI usage and compliance, it's the policy is important, and what the firm says they shouldn't do is important. But so is training to supplement it, so people know themselves and can be trusted to make a judgment call as to how they can use these tools effectively. And you have some sort of auditing or checkup process in place to make sure that what you've put in place is actually effective and working on whatever metric that you want to assess, whether that's security or some sort of skills development on the part of the users, right? So yeah, I think it's actually, I agree with Louise entirely, it could easily become an ethical and regulatory consideration if you're not careful.
You'll find that, I think that you'll get to a place where you'll get the law firms that do that, the ones with their kind of, their checklists who just go through, while everyone else is just miles ahead, right? And they're saying, I'm not sure we can pass this. Potentially more of a kind of immediate risk, I think, Charlie, is where you see, going back to this in-house world, much of the work that in-house lawyers are doing that might just be quick-fire stuff. They're getting questions from around their organisation. They're then responding as quickly as they can, trying to move a million and one things at once. Because that might frustrate the user, the stakeholder in the business, they'll start using AI a lot more. That, for me, is going to be a huge... We're already seeing it, the DIY lawyer in the organisation that has no legal knowledge, but just says, am I really going to ask the lawyers? They can be a bit slow. Or they'll start going on all about this whole privilege or confidentiality thing. Frankly, I just need an answer. And I think what you'll see is more of them using it. And as that gets more sophisticated, that becomes a real kind of ethical, regulatory challenge for lawyers. So I see it, everywhere. It's going to happen. You're right. The genie's out, right? It's going to happen. So the more we can embrace it, give people the freedom and empowerment to go with it, the better the outcome will be.
Yeah. And to add that those behaviours were there before AI was around anyway. I think
Yeah,
every lawyer
exactly
ever
right.
can relate to a client who's not versed in law, trying to tell them what they think the answer is and how it all works.
Yeah.
And to quote a really funny US lawyer I know who practices entertainment in the States, I'll never forget this quote. He said, "The marketing department of any business is the terrorist organisation of the company from the eyes of the lawyer," because they're always the ones who have the grandest ideas and they've thought everything out, but it's never grounded in any kind of sort of risk aversion or strategy in that sense. And you're right, there's a danger that that sort of unsupervised usage could just completely compound that.
I mean, it's a great question. If anyone knows the answer, please jump in. But you are right. These data centers require a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of water, to name just two items, and that is an impact from a climate perspective. I would say one thing that is more technology than AI, though, is that you don't always need to get on a plane to go and speak to your client or, your colleague in the States or what have you. So using tech in that way, although I appreciate it's not AI specific, does help you balance more than just tea bags. So I do think firms do need to think about sustainability holistically and take into account that actually using AI tools and using legal tech tools does come with a sustainability and climate impact. And so what else can they do to move the dial elsewhere? I don't have any other solutions though.
It might be. I think it's a brilliant question and I wonder whether this is a generational issue as well, because I hadn't even thought about the impact, he says, on the environment until someone was telling me their daughter, who was at university, was saying to their mum, who I know, "Why are you using ChatGPT like Google? You do realise the impact that's having." And it was only at that point you realise, wow, that is a thing, and I hadn't thought about it. And how do you balance off the kind of exponential rise of this? And I don't think it's stopping. And you can see, let's be honest, the tech bros in the US aren't going to be too worried about the impact on the climate when they're looking at becoming the first trillionaire in the world, right? So I think that at the moment, the drive for the speed in which we get this rolled out and growing, and the size of the infrastructure that's needed to make it happen, at the moment, the tech bros are kind of ruling the world, right? And in some respects, that's much more, we're now into the politics of it, that's much more of a kind of humanity issue than it is almost, about the environment. It's their view of the world is, well, we'll have basically AI will take over this world in a generation. That's quite terrifying, right? And there's no one there to stop the Musks of the world from wanting to take over. And so, gosh, I don't know how we got into this, but this is from...
We should be ending on a high, Dan.
But I think you're right. These other considerations seem to have gone out the window as we're looking at being a bit more efficient.
Yeah. I can pass 3 very quick insights from people who are much more clever than me, and I'm not claiming them to be my own, from people who work in innovation at firms. If you're an optimist, there's an argument that the cost of inference and using AI models is falling, and that at some point it will be, as investment in this space continues, it will be simply more efficient to query AI in this way, to the point where it will have a negligible impact on, in economic sense and also in environmental sense in using the technology. Many people don't buy that, and I completely understand that as to why. The second was that, again, someone who was responsible for developing AI strategy said, we don't just look at the needs and use cases of our team in a sort of general sense. We try and identify, is there a type of query or use case we can use where we use a smaller model, a small language model rather than a large language model to get the job done, or at least the bit of it that we need it to do, rather than having a blanket one-size-fits-all approach to the task. And then to build on Dan's point, it's also known when AI isn't the right thing to use at all. And if you can use something else that's like Google or an existing technology that will do the job just as well and completely mitigates the risks of these hallucinations and other kind of considerations that come with AI, then just do it and make sure that when you're doing AI literacy courses with your team, they understand where those distinctions and differences lie.
That's a brilliant question.
Chicken and egg problem.
Brilliant question. There is no, to the best of my knowledge, reported case or judicial guidance on this, but in my opinion, if you are in the business and property courts, I don't think using AI to draft a witness statement is compliant with the relevant rules and the statement of best practice. But like I said, that is just my opinion. There is no case on it as far as I'm aware. And so I suppose that sort of doubly answers the question, because I would say, don't do it. And I'm not anti-AI. I'm really not. but that does then take away from your drafting experience and your drafting ability, because you're right, how are you meant to develop a skill when you're not given a chance to practice it? Because that is how you get better at things, you get a chance to practice.
So you wouldn't in your team use AI in that way
to draft a witness statement? No.
And gosh, this is interesting, because as a client would say, well, how long would it take you? How much would it cost? Well, I'll go with the AI if you say it's okay, and no doubt the partner will sign off that statement is acceptable. The fascinating thing for me with this is that I think we'll get to a world where that becomes normal, genuinely, and it takes some time. To your point, that it needs to have that oversight and that judgment. Much bigger for me is that real worry that how do you develop those skill sets? What's the impact? Because there is some research done. There was a Harvard Business Review article not that long ago about it's leading to real kind of sense of depression and kind of almost brain fog, that things are getting done without any thought going into it, right? So people are getting really uninspired now because they're producing this stuff without any kind of sense of ownership over it. And when you used to complete a piece of work, you had that kind of real pride in your work. That's gone, and what studies are starting to show is that that's having a real impact on people's overall well-being, ironically, because they're not getting the same kind of meaning or purpose from their work. So it brings in a whole host of issues. Personally, I would have been like, this is bloody brilliant. I don't need to do that statement, move on. And then you come to the client perspective and think, do I care whether or not yours is slightly different from yours if it does the job? And so a lot of this will end up coming back to what are people prepared to pay for, and the market is going to say, well, we'll go to the people who can do it most efficiently. And that has a real impact on the kind of, as you say, that personal touch to a lot of this work, which becomes very much democratized, which is why I will keep banging on saying it's the relationships, it's you as an individual, it's how you develop. If everything becomes a level playing field, give or take, then it's these skills that will set you apart. It's tough. I wish we had the answers.
Cool, that's a good note to end it on.
But arguably, could the AI not also help prepare the questions?
Guys are going to stress me out.
But it keeps a transcript, right? So we do a lot of interviews of stakeholders and of lawyers, and we do those interviews not for legal purposes, but just to say how are things in the organisation. It does the transcript, and then you say from that transcript, you prompt it to produce what you need. Well, I'd like you to look at it through the lens of these 5 different areas. Can you summarise it? And it does a great job, right? Now, that's not a witness statement to be signed off, but at some point, that's going to be the level of expectation. And particularly then, take the witness, put yourself in their shoes that might have a 100-page witness statement. Frankly, I really don't want to read this. I know I've got to sign it at the end, but do I really want to read it again and again and again? And at some point, that just won't be necessary because the human eye is not going to be anywhere near as effective as the computer or the AI technology. So I just think we're going to have to embrace it. And the question is not going to be if, and it's just going to be when, right? And it's fascinating to see where it's going to go.
I guess the final thought I'd add is I had a similar discussion at the Law Society's Bicentennial panel that was talking about AI and what role lawyers will play, and it speaks to Dan's point on sort of human understanding. My argument was, even, let's assume we still live in a society that broadly looks as it does today. We're not in some sort of dystopian cyberpunk future. My view is that there will still be a degree of information which will never find its way into an AI training data set that in certain circumstances can be unbelievably valuable and make a difference to your client's outcome. And the main example that I can draw on personally and anecdotally is regulatory and advisory work. There's plenty of times where a client has come to us, they have a novel product, it doesn't quite fit the traditional definitions of what an act from 2005 says, and if you plugged it into an AI tool, it might give its own interpretation based on the letter of the law and what the client's product is described as being. But there's been plenty of instances where we've said, here's the black letter law analysis, but we know based on our own personal experience of working either on other matters or with relationships that we hold directly with regulators or conversations that we've had with policymakers, stuff that's just done behind closed doors or isn't kind of readily scrapable into a training data set, the outcome's actually going to look more like X than it might Y on the sort of first basis. So those kind of insights and that sort of foresight to think in that way, I think, could be a differentiator. Again, assuming a few variables that we're all living in a world that's
sorry, something's just sprung to my mind. This happens quite a lot. I'm obviously getting old, but to the point of the question about how do you get this? So how do you get this knowledge, right? When this experience, this expertise, Someone was telling me about a tool that has been developed by a former lawyer, a private practice lawyer, that is another AI tool that is starting to work with, and I think it may have been, I'm saying Kingsley Napoli, but I'm sure it was Kingsley Napoli, you're looking at it, an ex-Kingsley Napoli partner, and they're taking almost the partner's thinking as they're drafting, right? So they're able almost live to take, why did you make that decision, or why did you make that call? And they're almost speaking into it. And from that, they're able then to help people understand the thinking behind the decisions. And it might be that's part of the direction of travel we're going in, which is the experiences passed down through the technology, as opposed to, as it used to be, being the apprentice in the room, listening to what the partner said, and you took notes, and then you became expert. That's just sprung to mind, and it may be I'll try and find the name of it. But that could well be one of the ways that people are thinking. They say you get this brilliant expertise down to juniors who are really struggling to grapple with this crazy world that you describe.
Then you use those interpersonal skills you talk about.
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's lose-lose now, isn't it? It turns out. And
That
we
is
want
not the
win-win.
note to end on.
We
On
want
that
win-win.
note, no, thank you all for your time this evening. Please join me in thanking the speakers for coming along tonight.
Pleasure.
We'll be going outside to network and maybe brainstorm an answers to all these unanswered questions in the 30 minutes we've got. But thank you all for your time and coming along this evening. It's much appreciated. Thank you.